I'd like to call this special budget meeting of February 29th to order. Looking for a motion to adopt the agenda with any additions. Councillor Nixon.
Your worship, can we just add under public comments the letter from Mr. Larson, so it doesn't have to get forgotten for class 5?
We don't? Yeah.
It came to this council in the budget package.
And a seconder for that motion? Councillor Knowles, all those in favor? Motion's carried. First item on the agenda is delegation and presentation from the Chamber of Commerce. I'm not sure, Judy, are you taking this?
Have to be turned on.
No, it's not taking a minute.
Thank you. I appreciate that Chamber has given us an opportunity to talk about the comments that we submitted. We feel very strongly that this is a very important issue, and I'd like to also thank the business community that's come out today to support us in this. So I'm going to talk about the Chamber role, because there was some concern about that, I think. Then we're going to talk about the issue. We're going to talk about assessment values, the risk, the role, which is unique this year, but it happened 2 years ago. Ratio calculations, which there's been a lot of discussion around. How should we do this? What's the ratio? We should pay what? A little bit of tax contribution background, and possibly a solution. So, Chamber's role. Obviously, our vision is to promote progress and development. We're the voice of business, and we're advocating on behalf of our membership and the businesses in Revelstoke. And a productive economy where business can thrive and increase employment and service brings value to the community at large. And I don't think anyone would disagree with that. So the issue. When I started at the Chamber 4 years ago, they came to me and said, we think businesses are paying too much tax. So we looked at it, and we've been, basically our Policy and Advocacy Committee have been looking at this for 4 years. And saying, we said this 3 years ago in our submission to council, we need to create fairness in the property tax system, and it's essential to retaining and attracting business to our community. The BC Chamber's current policy of fair taxation, which we are supporting at the AGM in May, has two aspects to it. Increase the efficiency of local municipal governments and improve the fairness of the business tax burden. And those two go hand in hand, but what we're going to talk most about today is the fairness of business tax. And just to talk about a little bit about, I did get comments from members, and one of our local realtors makes a comment that after analyzing a potential commercial purchase, investors decide not to pursue investing in Revelstoke due to the small or negative return on investment. We're talking about business properties. Commercial rental rates are higher than some other cities. Typically, commercial property owners pass on the cost of taxes to the tenants. And there's more in that letter. I will provide a follow-up of the communications after the meeting in email format to Dawn. Okay. So, even the most basic analysis show that businesses pay much higher tax than residents. But BC Chamber just did a study in preparation for their tax fairness policy, and one striking result was the disparity between business and residential rates becomes significantly higher in municipalities with higher expenses. So they took the top 75 spending municipalities and based the business tax rate, and it's much higher. So when a municipality overspends, the revenue comes from the business community. When we compared other business municipalities, or BC municipalities, our community rates are within the highest spending part. In 2013, the CFIB report, we were 16th out of 151 communities spending. So we know there's an issue there, and we know there's a correlation between the two. Assessment value. So this year we've had a little bit of a change in assessment values, but typically, when you look back, it's been about 80-20. 80% of the assessed value in Revelstoke is residents, and 20% is businesses, and that's all business. So that includes Downey and light industrial and utility. There was, and I say was, but it's still in the financial plan, which I'd like to address, an expectation of 50% of tax revenue coming from the business community, which is 20% of the assessed value, and that's just unrealistic. And also in this year's financial plan, it says that council has given direction to try and move to a 2-to-1 ratio. So those two things don't go together. They're apples and oranges, and one of them needs to come out of the plan. And I would like to see the 50% contribution of revenue come out of the plan because it's unrealistic. Our community can't sustain this imbalance. What happens when businesses are paying more in tax, people aren't going to build new buildings. We have a really different assessed value here. So for example, someone in the Big Eddy, their assessed value is much lower than Bart's new brewery is going to be in the light industrial class. So they're paying the same rate, but it's based on assessed value. So Bart's rate is going to be much higher than someone who's got a building that they haven't done anything to in 30 years. The other thing that it does is it discourages people from updating their buildings and renovating their buildings because their assessed value goes up and then their taxes go up. So there's a real, those go hand in hand. We think we need a new formula. We're going to talk about a formula today. It's not perfect, but we'd like to start the conversation about how that might work. Another comment here is to that. One of our business owners also sent in a comment that the outpouring of information that came from the public hearing during the mall application suggested to me that people are looking for better prices and more selection from local business. Saddling businesses with crazy tax burdens means that prices will go up, selection goes down, and businesses will seek to sell things with a higher return. This seems to be contradictory to what the city should be trying to achieve, and that being a community of successful businesses that can expand, both large and small, and bring diverse goods and services to the community. Another member says, what is very important is that council steadily and consistently do what it can to correct the disparity, as your report points out, and much more likely needs to be done. So the risk to the roll this year is, it's not unique because it happened in 2014. And it's mainly, I think, RMR are being assessed from residential to commercial, and then the owners of the units or RMR themselves dispute that it's not rented out more than however many nights a year that it should be. I think it's 130 or something. And in 2004, we were 300,000 short in tax revenue. So, good, lesson learned, right? We know that. We know that that's a risk. This year, it's much higher. The assessed value risk is $80 million, and that's a guesstimate. That's going on what's in the city spreadsheets, but I think that's fairly good estimate. So if you put that 80 million into business from residential, then you come with 78% residential tax base assessment. But if you put it back in, we're still at 84 residential assessment. And we believe that taking that 80 million and moving it to business before it comes in, counting your chickens before they're hatched, is probably not the best way to go about it. So, ratio. We talk about ratio, and a lot of people have different opinions about ratio, but in fact, ratio is just the difference that exists between two different things. And in this case, we're talking about how much a business pays in tax versus how much it doesn't. Our largest assessment base is residential, and historically, and I think this is in all communities, they have the lowest mill rate. What we're suggesting is to base the mill rates on the residential rate and calculate the classes based on this rate. So the way we figure out mill rate is you take the money that you want. So this year, in this year's financial plan, the tax revenue ask is $9.5 million. Now, if you add the 750, it becomes 10.2, but we're just gonna go with this number from the financial plan. And then the total assessed value. So if all things were equal across the board, everyone would pay 7.67. So that's the starting point. Now the next calculation just shows you if you increase your tax base assessment and you still want the same amount of money, everyone pays less. And of course it works the other way. If you want less money and you have the same assessed base, everyone pays a little bit less. So we're saying, and we ran a lot of different numbers, but we're saying this year it's feasible to start the ratio at 3.5 to 1. Our ultimate goal is to get closer to 2, and that's council says closer to 2. We're not saying it has to be 2, but closer. So if we go 3.5, and then if we say, okay, well let's just make it, if it would be fair if everyone bases what they pay on that. So the residential mill rate in this case to get $9.5 million, 5.1. Let's say small business is 3.5 times that, so they're 17.85. Light industrial is 1.7 times small business, so they're 30. Major industrial is 1.9 times the small business. The utility is a max of 2.77. I think that comes from the province, I don't know. And then the seasonal, we've said 3 times the residential mill rate. So that it's a little bit lower than small business, because seasonal, obviously, they have a smaller revenue period. So if we did that and we put it in a spreadsheet, this is really hard to see, but what we did in the spreadsheet is we basically took the residential mill rate and then we put our formulas in, so we times 5.1 times 3.5, and then what you do is you just change the residential mill rate until you get how much tax you need. Now in this case, we have put the risk to the roll back into the residential assessment base. So if all of that 80 million actually went into business and they were charged at a business rate this year, then the actual tax value of that would be $1 million. It's right there. So here's the tax revenue that you get from this calculation, but if the residential moved to small business, you'd be up $1 million that you could put into reserves or whatever. What does that mean to the residents? It means that instead of paying, $481 per 100,000, they're paying $520. So it's a difference of, I think it works out to $39 per 100,000 for residents. Is that an increase? Yes, it is. Where
is that on here?
The change is $29 per 100,000. So we'd be collecting, you'd be collecting 510 per 100,000 as opposed to 481, and that's $29 per 100,000 to the residents. What does that mean to business? It's actually a savings. Small business saves 66 per 100, and then the savings go down here. And unfortunately, that's where we need to move, because you're not going to create fairness and get rid of the disparity without making that move. And so whether that move is 3.5 this year or 3.8 or whatever, it needs to start moving. And I think, well, this was in our submission, so you're aware that last year the tax ask from revenue-wise was 45% from the business community and 55% from the residential community, or 54, right around there. This year it's flipped, and we're back to the business community paying 55% of the tax contribution in revenue. And it's just, if they're 20% of the assessed base, it's just unrealistic, and it cannot continue. We need to fix this. We need to find a way to fix it. I'm not saying this is the perfect plan, but I'm saying we do want to work with you to make this try and work. Throughout the financial plan, there's lots of, like, you know, appropriately balancing revenue limitations and expenditures is something that we need to do. But it says in here, work with the provincial assessment authority and other municipal partners to balance property taxation and achieve a more equitable taxation system. So that's in the financial plan. What efforts have been done to do that? We'd like to work with you and the BC Chamber. The BC Chamber's got a lot of information on this that we can use to work towards making this better. Again, on page X, the council has said, over a 4-year period, bring the tax ratio from commercial to residential closer to 2.1. And then again, on page 8, we've got the 50-50 comment, which needs to be addressed. On page 9, the ratio of class 6 to class 1 has gone from 3.79 to 3.84 this year. So again, it's going in the other direction. Based on current numbers and assumptions, reducing the ratio in line with council's objectives will further shift the tax burden from business to residential. So we know, we're saying that's what has to happen. If we need that much money, if we're going to spend that much money, we need that in the coffers, then residents have to pay more. It's clearly in there. Okay, so a recommendation is that council adopt a new model for calculating fair and equitable tax contributions. We're not saying adopt our model, but we're saying we need a new model. We're just saying that it's possible. We're showing you that it's possible in that model. That the 2016-2020 financial plan be adjusted to achieve a 2.1 ratio by 2020. And to do that, got to start now. So one really interesting thing that I found out in my research, and I've done a lot of research on this. We've been looking at this for 4 years as the chamber. Probably learned more than I ever wanted to know, but there's a council needs to adopt a rate bylaw, correct? And that rate bylaw is how that's broken out. So I have a quote here from BC Assessment. Just bear with me for a second. It basically says that council adopts the rate bylaw based on how they want to break out the taxes, and that be considered and well into the province by May 15th. That's what the provincial government is, May 15th. So at BC Assessment, we'll have a revised roll from BC Assessment. They tell me by March 23rd. So there's still time to take that final roll and say, okay, how can we break this up? Because we'll know then what's residential and what's business. We don't have to put $750,000 extra tax into the budget. We'll know exactly what we have on March 23rd. And we'll have, and council will have time to say, okay, how can we make this work? And the chamber is more than willing to sit down with you and talk about that. I don't know how that compares with having the budget approved, but the budget, maybe that can be approved. Maybe the spending and that's approved, and the tax rate bylaw gets approved when you get the assessment and when you re-look at the breakout of how that tax happens. So there is some time to actually consider this. Even if council approves the budget next week. I don't know how the community charter works on that,
But all those assessed values that come to us, they are still subject to all the appeals that are going on.
No, the appeal process ends March 15th, and BC Assessment will have the revised roll, so the actual roll, this is what they tell me, to their partners, which is the municipalities, by March 23rd.
Except that, the impression that I'm under, Graham, you answered the question, but when properties are subject to assessment appeal, it could go on for 3 years.
That's correct.
So, it still does not, just because we get the assessment coming in, does not mean that that's what it actually is. It's still subject to all the appeals, which is, this year is $80 million, and I'm not sure what's outstanding from previous years. And the same thing is going to happen next year and the year after. So, I just wanted to clarify that because there is risk.
So then it does make sense to keep that calculate it based on residential, until it gets actually properly assessed.
Or you take the money and you put a big portion of it aside in a tax stabilization account, which is what
Yeah.
we're doing.
You can, but then what you need to do though is that extra 750,000, so you're going from 9.5 million asked to 10.2, that needs to be spread out across all the classes, not just the business class. So the residential class last year was at 4.88 as a mill rate, and it's gone to 4.81 this year. So yes, I understand that residential assessments have gone up an average of 9.8%, but still the mill rate has gone down. So we need to stay focused on, and you have to do this in baby steps. You can't just go out and say, well, now we need this much more money for the rest of it, right? So, and that's why we need to start now. Could have started 2 years ago, but we need to start now. And the BC Chamber did a study, when municipalities overspend, it gets put on the business community. And the business community is saying, we can't handle this burden. It's too much. And it's detrimental to new development. So, Bart hummed and hawed about whether to build that new brewery, and he's still quite concerned about what the taxes are going to be, because he's got a much higher assessed value than many of the other buildings in Revelstoke. And it's overall less than 23% of the assessed value is business. And you want them to make 55% of the revenue. It just doesn't, the math doesn't work out.
Have you got more stuff on here too that you want to go through?
No, I don't think so, but I am going to send some of the backup that I've used for this. I didn't want to bring it today because I know that Dawn likes to vet it through her, so I will do that. And is there any other questions for me?
Any questions from council?
Thank you for your time.
Okay, thanks, Judy.
Motion? Yeah. Thank you, Your Worship. This afternoon I'm just going to start with just a brief synopsis of property tax in Revelstoke, how we got to the ratios and the history of what our taxes have been And when I go through this, I'm going to speak about Class 1 residential and Class 6 business. I'm going to restrict it to those two for the time being, because those are the major classes here. So just to kick off with, I'm just going to do a very brief outline. So property tax rates are determined for each class independently. I don't think that's a short-term goal here. Assessment values for each class rise or fall independently as well. So assessment values go up or down, and rates go up or down in each class independently of one another. So over the years, that's essentially what the council has done. They treated each class separately and determined those rates accordingly. That does not apply, of course, to Class 2, where Bill 55 governs the multiple, 2.77 times the business rate. So council strayed a little bit from that model in 2012 to 2014, and they actually fixed the ratio of major industry to light industry at 1:1. And this resulted in 2012 there being a 16% reduction against an average increase across all classes of 1.5%, Class 4. In 2013, there was a 23% increase in Class 4 against an average increase of about 4%. And in 2014, there was an increase of about 4% for Class 4 against an average increase of about 2% across the board. So it didn't work by fixing that ratio between those two classes. So that was abandoned in 2015. So assessment values, as I say, rise and fall independently. There's no uniform relationship between the assessment values of each class and how they rise and fall. So they all go at different rates. So the rates for each class are independent, and so the ratios flow. So we'll see in a moment, as I go through these slides, how where little movement in assessment value occurs, the ratios remain constant. But when assessment value increases, become divergent, the ratio becomes much larger. With a floating ratio approach, council is able to determine the contribution from each class independently. With a fixed ratio, this flexibility is diminished, and taxes paid by other classes are determined by the ratio rather than the change in assessment value. So I have a simple model here, an example. I know some of you have seen this before, and if you have, I apologize for repeating myself, but I think it's, although it is quite simplistic, I think it's useful to see how the system works. So in year one, we have a house that's assessed at $100,000. The rate is $5 per 100,000. The taxes are $500 from the house. For a business, the same value. The tax rate is $15. The amount of taxes generated is $1,500 for $32,000. The tax ratio is 1 to 3, 1 to 3, and the amount of taxes generated by those two properties is 1 to 3 also. In year two, we have a substantial increase in the house assessment value. Perhaps a ski hill got developed or something, and so it went from 100,000 to 200,000. Now, traditionally, business class assessments do not fluctuate as much as residential. They're not subject to the same market influences. And so in this case, the business property went to 150,000. So council in those circumstances said they didn't want to increase any further the taxes for the year. They wanted to keep it at $2,000. So they adjust the rate to make sure that the same income is generated by each class, 500, 1,500. So the house goes down to 2.5, the business goes to 10. The amount of taxes that's collected from each class is the same, 1 to 3. But the tax rate ratio goes 1 to 4. It does not mean that more taxes are being generated by each class. Now, the alternative to that, I'll just go to the next slide here, is the council could choose to fix the ratio between those two classes. With the assessed value of $200,000 for the house and $150,000 for the business, a fixed ratio of 1 to 3 would mean that the house rate would go to $3 and the business rate would go to $9. I kept it to whole numbers here just for simplicity. So the house taxes would go from $500 to $600, and the business taxes would go down from $1,500 to $1,350. So the ratio of actual taxes paid is 1 to 2.25. So what's happening here is there is a shift in the property taxes that are generated from the business to the house simply because the house's value has gone up. So it becomes more of a wealth tax, if you like. So it's on the premise that because your house goes up in value, you should be paying more taxes. There's nothing wrong with this approach. Perfectly legal and all that kind of stuff. You can do it. Nothing wrong with it. I'm just explaining what it means in terms of that. So why did the ratio change over time? We've seen it change over time. And I'll go through a little bit of the history here so you can see. I was hoping that was a bit clearer. Sorry, Your Worship. Residential tax rates. Let me see if I can point this out. So this is the history of residential tax rates over the time, from 1996 through 2015. And you'll see that they go up progressively until about 2004, but then they drop off markedly in 2005 through 2008, and then they start moving up a little bit over the next few years. The green line here is the ratio, which obviously is 1 to 1 in terms of residential. So for business, what happened to business? So here you see this, a similar kind of thing, rates going up in from 1996 to 2004. Then they start to slope off a little bit to 2008. Not quite such a marked reduction as in residential, but they do slope off. A little bit of a blip in 2009, we'll explain that in a minute. And then they start falling off, become flatter as time goes on to 2015. The ratio to residential taxes, though, remains relatively flat between 1996 and 2004. Around 3, a little bit less than 3, sometimes even over 3, generally around 3. And then it goes up significantly to 2008, 2009, this is about 6.6. And then it starts going down again. And I'll show why that is. So these are the assessment increases that happened during that same time period. So you'll see that there's a direct correlation here in the first few years, 1997 to 2004. There was very little movement in assessment increases for business and for residential. It was pretty flat. Nothing happened here. And so you'll get a business ratio of 3 to 1, so fairly consistent right the way through that time period. Then in 2005, we saw a very rapid increase in residential assessment values. And I don't think I need to go over why that was, but in 2008, it will. Someone needs me to, but we saw 4 years of very rapid increase in house prices up until 2008. So what happened, and you'll see a direct correlation here to residential rates, the residential rate plummeted to accommodate for those increases in assessment values. Just remember, council only wants to produce so much revenue from each class, and so much revenue overall from the entire tax base. During that same time period, business assessments did go up, but not nearly as much as residential. They weren't subject to the market fluctuations that residential were. So their rate went down at a much slower pace to accommodate that. As a result, the ratio went up substantially. After that time, after 2009, things started to slow down a bit, there wasn't much movement. In 2010, you'll see that commercial assessment values went up a lot quicker than residential, and that's why that was a little bit less there. So what does that mean? Any questions so far, Your Worship? Pretty quickly, I think. For some of you, I think it's on that, but I think it's worth going through it. So what happens to taxes, the total taxes that we pay over time? So the green lines that will show up on the legend here But the green line is residential taxes, and the blue line is Class 6 business taxes. So you'll see that over time, 1996, where are we? Aha! Well done, dear.
With Cindy.
Okay, that makes it a lot easier. So here we go. So between 1996 and about 2007, you'll see that the relationship between business taxes, Class 6, and residential, Class 1, was very similar, right the way through that time period. Regardless of the fact that in 2005, the ratio went from 3 to 6.6. The relationship between the taxes actually paid was the same. And then in 2008-9, you'll see the divergence between residential taxes and business taxes. Business taxes tend to slope off, fall away, flatten out, while residential taxes continue to rise, but their portion of the overall burden. So you'll see now, in 2015, that there was a much I wanted to point this at a plane, it would probably work. Anyway, in 2015, you'll see there's a much greater divergence between business taxes and residential. So in table form, Class 1, this is what we budgeted, and this is what we actually generated from Class 1 residential between 2010 and 2015. So here we've got our budgeted numbers. This is what we actually collected from that class, and these are the variances. So in 2010, we were short by about 25,000. In 2011, we were short by about 14.5. In 2012, we actually generated more taxation from that class than we had anticipated.
Is that because of new construction? Is that the...
No, new construction's included in this. This relates to supplementary assessments, essentially. For Class 6, in 2010, you'll see that we were budgeting about 2.9. We came in at about $43,000 less for that year. And you'll see that the subsequent years, 2011 to 2015, what we were actually budgeting to come from Class 6 and what we actually generated from Class 6 during that year, during those years. So you'll see that there were deficiencies right the way through to 2015. I think it comes to about $150,000, something like that.
Last line, 2015, 117. 115 of that went out in December of 2015. Am I correct on that, Graham? That appeal process took that long? That we paid it out to one property owner, correct?
A substantial portion of that went to one property owner.
But it showed up in December.
Yeah, Your Worship, I think we still have supplementary assessments outstanding from 2012? 2014? Yeah. So we still have a few still outstanding, but still before the appeal board. So we're still waiting to see what happens with those. So you'll see that from Class 6 in 2015, we generated just over $3,375,000, which is about just a little less than $200,000 from what we generated in 2010. Residential taxes was $1 million for the same period. So, Your Worship, that completes my presentation for the day. If there's any further questions.
Councilor Lewis.
I have a couple of questions. This might be simplistic, Graham, but you said that council wants so much revenue from each class, and isn't really that the key? That we're asking the businesses to contribute roughly 55% of the revenue that we need to pay our expenses, when they're only 23% of the assessed value. And isn't that really the key and the difficulty that businesses have, or am I missing something?
No, that, Your Worship, that's entirely the key. It's council's choice as to how it wants to divide up the taxation pie, if you wish, between the various classes. And that you can do through, changing the rates and changing the policy.
And just so I can follow up on that, why have we done it in the past 50-50? There are only sort of 300 businesses and there are 1,100 residences, and why do we do it that way?
So, Your Worship, we haven't actually always done 50-50. Way back in 1996, it was something like 45%, 46% residential, and the rest was business. And so council passed a policy a number of years ago with a target of 50%, but residential would be at least 50%. Was that somewhat arbitrary? Sure, it was somewhat arbitrary. It wasn't designed to be scientific, but it was a target that was established by the council today, and that's what council has been working towards ever since. In recent years, we've gone up as far as 54% of residential. Now, that's clearly not as much as the chamber group would like. But certainly council has made progress in building the residential portion of that pie higher than what it has been in the past. So that's a function of not only new construction, which adds to additional value and additional revenues for that particular section of the pie, but it's also dependent on council's policy in terms of where they want to see tax increases or tax decreases. And you can achieve those things by increasing taxes in some classes and decreasing in other classes, still get to the same net result at the end of the day, but you're shifting more of that burden onto a different class, whether that be residential or any other class that you so choose.
And if I can continue, if I play the devil's advocate though, I mean, part of the problem with putting a burden like that on the businesses, as I understand it, is that not only do they have this incredible burden that they have to pass on to the purchasers of their goods and that type of thing, but the value of their property, the values of commercial properties are going down because of this problem. The taxes are so high that no one wants to come in and buy the commercial properties, as I understand it. And so they're going down in value, but they're increasing the value of the pie that they have to pay. So each business, when it goes down in value, they got to pay more. Is that not a fairness issue that we have to look at?
Your Worship, the only way the pie moves are on two factors. The first factor is the amount of new construction that's contributed by each class. So if a class contributes more new construction, then that would proportionally increase its share of the pie. The other factor is the tax rate that council chooses for each group, for each class. So, for example, in the plan that we have right now, the residential is slated to go up by 2%, business by 1%. So, by doing that, you're shifting ever so slightly more of the burden onto residential than you are to business, and so residential's portion of the pie would increase somewhat. And so those go in two ways. When the assessment values go up or down, doesn't matter because the rates go up or down. It's whether that particular class is actually contributing more new construction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so we as a council have to decide whether it's fair that the businesses pay 54% when they're only 23% of the assessed value, or whatever. Is that fair or not? And I guess that's the problem that the council has to struggle with.
Your Worship, that's exactly the problem you have to struggle with, and I don't envy you.
Councillor Stoll.
Your Worship, I want to make a statement that kind of goes against what you've stated, Councillor Brothers, but if I look at it, and Mr. Engels, maybe you could confirm whether I'm right or wrong here, that businesses pay property taxes pre-tax on their income, and homeowners pay property tax post-tax. So after they pay their income tax, that's how they pay their property taxes. Is that correct? Am I?
That's correct, Your Worship.
So when I look at that, homeowners have a limited amount of money to pay. Some of us, and I include myself as a business owner, have the opportunity to pass off some of that tax increase to our clients, and some of us cannot. I'm very cognizant of that fact. But if I look at a tax increase for a business, and let's say that the taxes go up and the business has to pay $500 extra a year for taxes, I wonder if that's a hardship or not likely going to be a hardship. And then if I were to put that same burden on a homeowner, and let's say a senior or a limited income, and I say, I need you to pay $500 more, then I look at it from that perspective and go, now I've really put a hardship on it. So that's kind of how I look at that. And then if I take it a step further and go, if residents have a limited pot of dollars to pay out into the community, will they pay more in taxes, will they be spending less dollars in the local businesses to support them? And that's where I find that coming.
Council Brothers.
Can I respond? And I get that. I think that's a real issue and it's a balancing act that we have to look at. But right now, the burden is on the businesses, as I can see it. And I think as a council, we've determined that, yeah, that's true. How do we rectify that? And it's a balancing act. And if I look at what you're saying, it's true. The residences don't get a write-off, but their property values are going up. So at some point in time, they will benefit from that. And in fact, for them, it's tax-free. So when you sell your residences are going up. You know, right now they're paying lower taxes, but they'll get the benefit later on, okay? For businesses, yes, they might be able to write it off now, and that might be something they can pass on to their clients or not. Their values of the properties are going down right now because of this difficulty with the tax. Nobody wants to come in and build here. That's a problem. But when they go to sell it, they pay tax. Okay, so there's a balancing act there, and I get that when people are on fixed incomes, we have to be conscious of that, I think. But on the other hand, we have to find something that's fair to both sides so that this community prospers, you know? And it's a very difficult thing, and what where I'm leaning toward is if we could do it in a gradual way, which is the way we thought that we would do it, that's the way to go. But we can't just say, no, we can't do it, because I think we are getting ourselves into trouble in terms of trying to get businesses to prosper, to improve their buildings, to come in and invest here. So.
Councilor Nixon.
Your worship, I think we're looking at two different issues here. There's the ratio that we're trying to chase, and there's the percentage of the pie. And the percentage of the pie going down from 54 to 45 for residents, I think, has been the tipper here. And I brought forward at budget meetings about class 5, tying them to class 6. If we did that, we'd have to look for $80,000, but that would flip that percentage right back up into residential, carrying a bigger percent of a smaller pie. And we haven't really discussed that.
I guess to Graham is that I don't understand why I would do that, because it's still a business classification.
So, Your Worship, I've done some real scenarios that I can certainly show council this afternoon when they're ready to do that. And we can certainly explore those areas for sure.
And it wouldn't fix the ratio, Your Worship. It would
No,
fix
because
the
it's
percentage.
going from one
Right.
business classification to another, so it changes the same thing. So you do one of two things, is that you change the ratio and add more to residential, or you find more cuts in the budget and you go to the classification that you want. And if there's an appetite to change that, then you would put that reduction into commercial, and the residential increase would still stay the same. So that's the other side of it.
And Your Worship, I had lunch with the United Church ladies today, and they do not want us to be pushing them up in percentage in the residents. So that's the message from today. It's not a
$5
letter.
soup would go up in price, you can't have that.
That was good soup.
I would actually like to see some of these scenarios that you've got, Grant, if you don't mind.
So, Your Worship, just to clarify, just to clarify from things that were said earlier today, I just want to show you that residential actually went up by 3.4%, 2016, and Class 6 business went up by 0.81%. Just want to point that out. That's from BCAA. So what we have on the screen in front of you now is the taxation spreadsheet, the worksheet that Council will recognise from last time we looked at it. And this is the scenario that's in the financial plan that was published. So it's a 2% residential and 1% business. So when we go to, and you'll see that last year this was a contribution from each class, so you can't read it from here, but I think that says 54% for residential and about 35% for business. The next building NMC, non-market change, and construction is still remains pretty much the same. When we go to including non-market change and new construction, and this is what we were talking about earlier, you'll see that there's a shift, and now we have a 45-45 split for residential and business because of Sutton Place being shifted from Class 1 to Class 6. So what I thought was, well, what happens if that goes back to Class 1? What would have happened if we hadn't had that? Let's just wash it out and get rid of this. So it's about 79 million. I know we were talking about 80 million earlier, but it's actually about 79 million. So let's take that out. Oops. Not enough zeros. So when you take out Sutton Place, and you add it back to Class 1, and you take it out of Class 6, this is what happens with a 2-to-1 tax increase. This is what it was last year. This is what it is for 2016. Virtually identical. The only reason behind the shift from 54-35 to 45-45 is Sutton Place. So the actual business assessments were 168,766, including non-market change. Is everyone clear with that?
Yeah. Can I just ask Graham a question?
Yes.
Graham, is it smarter for us to assume that the Sutton Place should just stay as it is? I mean, is that a smart thing to do, rather than what we were planning on doing is keeping the reserve and everything else? I mean, when I think through about Sutton Place, some of them are going to be successful in their appeals because a lot of people are I mean, they're not using it commercially, they're using it as residential. So we're going to get dinged for sure. Some of those appeals. So is it smarter for us just to assume they're residential and listen, if we then if they're then assessed commercial, then we have a bonus. We have this extra money coming through. Is that not smarter to do?
So, Your Worship, we have to go to what BCAA tells us in the tax law. That's how we have to calculate our tax rates. And so BCAA are telling us that this is the class that Sutton Place is going to be in. I'm bound to follow them. I can't choose which class certain properties go into. So we
You're
have
basically changing the assessed values and classifications, and you have not looked at that.
No, it's that BCAA. So they tell us which class that property is going to be in. We have to abide by that and use it. We can't change what BCAA is.
So the counter for us is what we're doing is putting the money away in a tax stabilization.
That's right. Taking that money out does not change the tax rate for everybody else.
And we're taking that money out of Class 6 because the money's collected in Class 6.
Precisely. So we're setting that one aside and saying, okay, we don't think we're going to be able to collect this, so we're going to put it away. When the appeals start coming in that are successful and start underwriting checks, that money is set aside and available for us to do that. Your worship, I think Councillor
Oh, sorry.
question.
Your worship, just a detail question, is the amount that we've put into the tax stabilization fund equal to the amount if 100% of the assessments were successful?
Your worship, no, it's equivalent to about 75%.
And this scenario you have up on the table here is the $80 million going back into residential.
Yeah, it's not really a scenario as such, it's just showing you,
What would,
if that hadn't have happened, if BCAA had not transferred some place from class 1 to class 6, this is what we would be looking at for 2016.
and this shows a 2-to-1, so what is the ratio between residential and class 6?
It's 3.84, your worship.
So basically the same as what we're doing right now, which is, I think,
Yeah, it wouldn't change.
378?
It wouldn't change, no.
Okay.
Because you're already setting the rates at 2 to 1, so that's what sets the rate, sets the ratio, regardless of the assessment balance. So I'm just going to, if that's okay with you, your worship, I'm just going to set this back to 0, so we know what we're talking about there. We go back to our scenario page. So we were looking at earlier, analysis, going to a 3.5 to 1. So I think I've got that here, just a second here. 3.5 to 1 ratio. So I'm going to show this.
Which is a 3.5% increase to residential, 1% increase
I'm going to show you what it means.
to first business.
So 3 to 5 means an 8% increase for residential and 3% reduction for business. And then you get to a roughly 3.5 ratio.
Sorry, Brendan, then what does that translate into per 100,000 for residential
Okay,
versus?
so we can look at taxes here. So for a residence, $100,000, it would be paying another $39 a year. For a house set at $250, it would be paying approximately $100 a year. And a house set at $500,000, approximately $195 a year. Additional. And for business, so again, assessed at $100,000, a reduction of about $55. At $250,000, a reduction of $139, and at $500,000, a reduction of $277.
And that's only a 3.5 to 1.
That's a 3.5 to 1, yeah. I can show you a 2 to 1, Your Worship, if you have the stomach for it, I can show you.
Well, let's put it up there for the media.
Sure. 2 to 1, here we go.
Okay?
Because we're talking about doing it over 5 years, and you're saying in 1 year, let's put it up for the meeting.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying what,
You're going to scare everybody, you know, and we're trying to
no,
achieve.
30% increase and the 30% decrease.
30% increase for residential, 30% decrease for business, to get to a 2 to 1 in 1 year.
In 1 year,
All right?
yes.
So if you were to phase that in over 5 years, Your Worship, that's probably around 5-6% a year, depending on how you see it. So it would be 5 to 6% a year increase for residential, and a 5 to 6% a year increase in business to get that 2 to 1 ratio. And that's just changing the ratio. That's not any increases for natural inflation or additional projects that we might have.
Yeah, that's a 0% increase in taxes. Well, it's a
Yeah,
2,
yes,
it's a 2 and a 1.
Yeah. It's just shifting one together.
And it's assuming that we can't, we don't have any savings. I mean, if we can have some savings, if we get some extra money from the commercial, and so we have some other pots that we might be able to tap into. If we can save on our budget, save on our expenses, and also if all of a sudden Sutton Group is,
Well, which is what we've been doing the last couple of months. Okay, let's get rid of that one real quick.
Is that right, that one, Your Worship?
No.
Bear with me a second. So I believe there was a request for to look at one. Just scroll. I've got so many on my. So I've got a request to show this. This is 4% residential, 1% everybody else. So the ratio goes from 3.79 to 3.77.
But then what's the cost? What's the cost per 100,000?
Oh. So again, 20, 49, and 98.
That's over a year.
That's per year, yeah.
Per year.
And for business, that would be 18 for 100,000, 46 and 92. I've got a number of other scenarios, Your Worship. I can do 2% residential and 0.5% everybody else. That takes the ratio from 3.79 to 3.83. It was previously 3.84 at 1%. Really, this council, the Worship Council's decision to provide directions to the kind of scenario they want to see. You've already put in your financial plan a 2 and 1, so that's kind of
Your Worship,
Councilor Mason.
Graham, do you have a scenario with taking class 1 down to class 6?
That's, it won't work as a scenario, council units, I'm afraid. But we're going to lose, you're going to lose about $100,000 in revenue in class 5 by doing that, because it's essentially half the rate, pretty close to half the rate. Yeah. Which you've got the room to do, if that's what you want to do. Council can do that.
So Graham, I'm trying to figure out what is the fundamental problem with and I'm wondering if it's the way the assessed values are like set in commercial, because I know that new construction, the assessed values are so high but if you go back to one of your other tables where it showed the green line of residential taxes collected and commercial taxes collected, the commercial taxes have flattened off. So we're not collecting the same increase that we are compared to residential. So, but everybody is hung up on this spread, the ratio between the two, and I can see why, because it doesn't look very good. But when you look at the actual dollars that are collected, they flattened out. So we're not collecting huge amounts of more money, new money from commercial.
Right, Worship. And that's been a function of the successful deals we've seen over the past half dozen years. So we've been writing checks back to various property owners on the commercial sector that have successfully appealed their assessments and have refunds. And so that's why you've seen that flattening out. You also have to appreciate also that the assessed value of a building is not necessarily the same as the cost of constructing. So BCA will look at that as one of the criteria, but that's not the only criteria for how we assess commercial buildings.
Council Brothers.
But again, the concern that I have is because of our tax structure, because it's so high for people coming in, values of businesses, the values of the commercial buildings that we currently have are going down. They're not going up as the residences are going up, because residences are exchanging hands. It's more vibrant, but the commercial is just flat. It's flat. So you know, it's a secondary problem for people who have commercial buildings or who have commercial businesses, that, you know, their values are going down as well. So we've got to find a balance somewhere. We've got to start and find a balance. And you know, I'm throwing this out, and I don't know whether this is the right way to do it, but it appears to me that the only solution to the inequity is there's going to have to be a bit more burden on the residents. It's as simple as that. So I guess maybe what we should look at is what's the appetite, what's the fairness from year to year of having an increase in the residents? And is that the way of going about it, rather than playing with numbers and ratios and everything else?
Well, which is basically what we've done this year by going a 2% on residential and a 1% on commercial, but with the change in assessments, all we've done is maintain the ratio that we've had the past year. Marginally, I don't think it's really changed that much.
3.79, 3.84.
Yeah, and you can look at some of these other ones here to see what it takes to make a big change in that ratio. It's balancing what you think as a council is acceptable to the community, and you know, ask yourself, do you think that a 5, 6, 7, 8% increase to the residents and 1 or 0 to commercial is acceptable to the residential tax base? And I don't think that it is.
It depends on the amount. I mean, if we're looking at a $200,000 house and $100 per year, we're looking at $8, $9 per month. Is that acceptable? For most people, it probably is. For some people, it's not.
Well, nobody looks at $8 a month or $20 a year. They look at what the percentage, everybody looks at the percentage.
True,
and the same as the business community looks at the ratio. And it's just not that easy to make the big changes that people want to see.
I agree, but maybe that's why we should look at the numbers and what the actual cost is, and maybe that's more palatable than listening to a 5%, or because people, I have difficulties with that. So if I don't have difficulty with understanding that my taxes are going to go up for $100 per year. I mean, I get that, it's easier to understand. So that's the only thing I'm saying, is that maybe that's the route we go, because it's easier for people to understand what the repercussions are.
Councilor Lindo.
Your worship, I think our goal at the start of the year was to finish this up by the end of the year, December. We're a little bit late right now. The way I break down is this: there's 3 pieces to the budget process. At the start of it, and we started in the summertime this year, we started going through things line item. We're making decisions about spending, what the priorities are. Then we sort of hash it out. The second part that is key to the discussion today is the piece of the pie. This is a policy decision, that we have an existing policy that says we should have it in this area. It's been tweaked in the past several years, and I believe one of the comments from the finance director was, you know, does this policy need to be revisited? However, at this point, that's a discussion for after we pass this budget. I mean, we're at the last yard here, and we're talking about the key third part of it, which is what actual percentages we're going to come up with. I'd like to address the Chamber of Commerce report that came last week, you know, and I'd like to contextualize the recommendations here according to that time schedule, because what we need to do now is pass a budget. And a lot of these recommendations, some of them I agree with, other ones not as much, but is now the time to have a discussion about them, or is this something that we're going to be scheduling for further discussions as we move forward as a council? Number 1, start the budgeting process August 1st of the year. I agree. I think we might have even started a little bit earlier this year, so that's fine with me. Ideally, finish it by the end of the year, because that's what's important here, is when we don't have a budget passed by, you know, it's March 1st tomorrow, city staff are unable to move forward with capital projects. They're unable to get going with construction projects. They run into time crunches. It's September all of a sudden, and we're trying to put down pavement, and everything gets messed up. So we need to pull the trigger and make a decision pretty quick. I'm ready to do that here today. So I agree with that one. Number 2, 10-year plan for infrastructure and asset management. Asset management has been a key focus of the city's planning and engineering department. We've got a really good proponent of that in Mr. Thomas, who is a leader in asset management. A 10-year plan, I don't know, but I do agree that asset management is something we need to focus on. Number 3, provide clear financial data and statements, and I agree. When people get their city tax bill, they go, oh my gosh, the city's spending all this money. Well, what percentage of that goes to schools? Like those kinds of simple things I'd really like to say. So maybe that's something that could be put forward to staff as direction. Let's take a look at some best practices out there. But that's not something that we're deciding before we pass this budget. An independent core review. We have, hopefully, from the Municipal Auditor General, a limited review coming forward sometime. It's much delayed. I'm sure everyone's read about the scandals in that department in Victoria. That's beyond our control. I personally would like to see the results of that procurement review to sort of, gives us a good indication. I've read several of the reviews that have come out across the province. A lot of them I didn't think were very useful. Some of them were very useful, so it's really up in the air in my view what we're going to see back from the city. Number 5, and that's what we're looking at today, improve the fairness of the business tax burdens, and then it talks about the rationale for property tax alignment. This has been a central discussion at council for 5 years now. It's been every year, and we've had the same problems with assessment appeals, sort of throwing a monkey wrench into the whole process every year. My personal stated opinion is that we need to improve the ratio, and I would really like to see us at a provincial average. I know that the Chamber's advocating for 2 to 1. I don't advocate for 2 to 1. I think we just need to be the same as everywhere else in BC, and it's a little bit higher than that. However, I do agree with Mr. Inglis in the very first part of this presentation is that you fall into a trap when you start chasing the ratio. When you focus on that one number there, it doesn't tell the whole story, and the whole story is complex. There's lots of different factors you need to take a look at. So when I get a text on my phone in the morning saying it's jacked up to 55% all of a sudden, that doesn't tell the whole story to me. That says that we've had a massive $80 million appeal shift from one category to another. Obviously, that's going to kill the ship. I think, in the last meeting, my personal position was higher than 2 to 1. I was looking at 2.5 to 1 or 3 to 1, because I think it will take time for us to shift slowly and gradually off of the business ratio towards the residential ratio. It's not something that can be done all at once. I don't think 2 to 1 is really going to do it, because as you see, we're at 3.84, we were 3.79. We're going in the wrong direction. But over time, as our residential tax base increases at a higher rate than commercial tax rates, which I think we definitely have much more potential for growth, we will move in that direction. But right now, five of these 6 points that are here in front of us for as a recommendation or comment are policy discussions we have after we pass this budget. We're at the last year here, and we need to make a decision so we can get going with our capital projects, so we can get going with the work right now. I would like to entertain all these discussions, but it's not going to happen before this budget gets passed.
Okay, well, I guess I agree on quite a few things that you talked about. When we started the budget discussions and we made our goals of when the budget would be done, I guess in my mind, a little bit of semantics, but I wanted us to have an approvable budget.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily an approved budget, an approvable budget. And that's what we have right now, and here we are in your scenario at the 11th hour talking about the budget and different things that we could be doing. And I guess this is what I would have liked to have seen a couple of months ago, but here's where we are today. And if the community is more engaged and council around the table has more questions, I would be more inclined to be looking into those and looking at scenarios and looking at questions than being hell-bent on approving a budget today or tomorrow or Tuesday. And I understand the part about our projects, and that's fine. Grant hopefully can answer the question, but what we've done in the past is that we went for early budget approval on certain projects so that they weren't waiting to the 11th hour to get started. And I would rather we would be doing that than rushing through and approving a budget that everybody is still not 100% comfortable with. We're spending a lot of time talking about ratios and are we around the table 100% comfortable on the amount of money that we're spending? Because I don't hear anybody talking about still looking at possible cuts. And you know, I don't want to pick on the planning department, but I went and talked to Dean about this $75,000 for the software for building permits. And I think there's a lot of good reasons why we should be looking at it. The question really is that, do we implement that this year? Is there time to implement it? Or is it a big deal to put it off next year? And the impression I'm under is it's not a big deal. It's not going to change much. I think that there's a lot of advantages, but if we were to bring that software in, would it be integrated into the community and we would get a full year's value out of that? The answer is no, because we're still studying it and we're going to make sure how it's going to work, and it's going to integrate with the accounting software, which hasn't been implemented 100% in the front end either. So there's $75,000 that we could put off till next year, and it's a special project, and I'm assuming that it's only a one-time fee. Am I wrong with that?
No, that's correct.
So, and I guess, you know, Councillor Nixon's brought up a couple times about the class 5 and the class 6, and so if we need $100,000 to balance 5 and 6, well, there's 75,000 of it right there. But is everybody around the table satisfied with the individual budgets? Are they saying that this is how much it's going to cost to run the city? I don't particularly like the comment that we're the 16th highest spending in the province, and that concerns me. And I guess what I've been looking for a couple of months is all the reasons that we're the 16th highest, if we are. I haven't actually looked at it to find out, and if we are, what can we do to change that? And I'm looking for solutions instead of questions and problems. And quite frankly, I don't see a lot of that. I don't see a lot of solutions. But it gets down to, if we're not 100% happy, I don't want us to be rushing through and approving a budget. But I still would like ideas on how a lot of these projects that have to move forward can still move forward. Councilor Nixon.
Your worship, just with the planning software concerns me, because it's one we've kicked down the road about 4 years in a row. And then we get criticism around development permits. And we, with the software, can show that your permit, all the paperwork's done on it, and it's now in the software, and you can track it. You know, so that might help with relationship building with the builders out in the community. So we're, again, caught in a conundrum. Do we move forward and improve the process, or do we kick it down the road again? And I know it's an easy one to kick down the road.
Councilor Lewis.
I hear what you're saying, Councillor Orlando, and I think sooner or later we got to pull the trigger. But I also agree with His Worship that we're past our time of December 31st. I mean, we've passed that. We have some time now, and I think as a council, we're starting to gel a bit more about issues. We're starting to understand issues, understand the budget a bit more. We're dialoguing a whole lot more about what our difficulties are and what policy decisions we have to make. I'm inclined to say, you know, let's explore that a bit more. I mean, I certainly have problems with our spending and our budget, and I don't think we've gone to the degree, the extent of making sure that we're satisfied with our spending and whether we're spending wisely or not spending. I agree with his worship that, yeah, there is some concern that if we're number 16 on spending in the province, then we have a problem. And we might not be 16, but we're high up there. There's no doubt about that. So we've got to take a look at that as a council. And that's part of the piece of the puzzle. If we can decrease our spending, then we have more money to share the pot and get our taxes in order. So I'm inclined to not make a decision today, but I would like to have a plan of how we move forward, Your Worship. And I get what you're saying. I know that there are some issues we have to look into, but how do we go about doing that? And what's our plan moving forward?
Council's going to have to, you know, the next thing I was going to bring up is that if there's changes, or if somebody wants to approve it the way it is with the increases that are there, they should put a motion on the floor, and I'll accept any motion. It's right in, don't look at me like that. It's in council's bailiwick to make decision, and if there's cuts that people want to bring to the table, now is the time to be doing it. But they only happen when council makes a motion and it's approved. Councilor Nixon.
Now I'm going to make a motion, Your Worship, that this budget go through as originally written. I'm going to suggest that we give it for second and third reading today.
Motion on the floor for first, second, and third reading. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councilor Randall seconds it. Discussion on the motion. Councilor Nixon.
I think the chamber is right coming to us with their concerns. That's part of democracy. I think I made the assumption that the chamber was well represented around this table by members of the chamber. I think that when we work on this budget for next year, we need to do committee of the whole, where every council is at the table. And Penticton, very good idea in Penticton, if you look at Penticton. They take a week, all councilors show up, all staff show up, and they work for 3 to 5 days solidly on a budget, where everybody's in the same room working on that budget. Because I know I sat with different committees that worked really hard going through scenarios and trying to find savings. And I think we all need to be at the table, and all senior staff need to be at the table. And we need to take a block of time and do it, and maybe it's October, but, you know, we can get that first draft again from Mr. Ingalls in the end of September, and we sit down and we work through it, and we're all there at the table, so that nobody says, I didn't think about that, or I didn't know about that. We all wear the budget.
Councilor Brothers.
I tend to agree with Councillor Nixon that maybe next time around we need to do this as a committee as a whole, because I found it very difficult to work from individual committees and somehow bring forward all of the issues in the budget. It's nice to have council around the table to dialogue and discuss that. But having said that, I'm not in favor of moving forward on this budget for second and third reading. I think that we really need to listen to what the chamber has said and their concerns. And if we were going to move ahead today, then I think we should up the percentages or change the percentages. And I'm thinking maybe we go 3 to 1, 3% for residences and 1%, because we have to show that we're moving in a direction that's progressive in terms of the fairness of taxes. So, but I think I still would prefer to defer it and have some further discussions of maybe we can find some savings.
Councilor Lando.
Your Worship, I value the Chamber of Commerce. I'm a member of the Chamber of Commerce. I value their input, but I tend to agree with Councilor Nixon in that, you know, we started in July last year, and there's a lot of opportunity to be a part of it. What we've done in the past few weeks is advertise the budget at a rate that's been put out to the public. We've had our opportunities throughout for input and consultation, and to take, to fundamentally change the entire process based on one input that came in afterwards is not, I think, fair consultation, because everyone had an opportunity through the process to be involved in it. So I'm going to disagree on that point. I think, and then to restate it, most of the recommendations from the chamber need to be policy changes. They're not changes that are going to happen between now and whether we pass it today, next week, or 3 weeks from now. These are long-term policy changes that need to be incorporated into the process next year. We can change the rate right now. We can say, hey, we want to get closer to 2 to 1, so we're going to put residential up to 6 and business down to 0 or whatever. We still have that. That's what we're talking about doing right now at this point. But many of these policy points, I don't think are appropriate to be discussed at this point. So. And then, sorry if I just might add on, it's at our peril that we do it at this point. We made a decision, we put something out to the public, and if we make drastic changes to it, I think there's probably a requirement, there might be a requirement to re-advertise this and redo it again. So.
Councillor Sills.
Your Worship, I tend to agree with Councillor Nixon as well. I believe that Councillor Orlando has nailed it as far as the policy process regarding some of the things the Chamber brings up. And Councillor Nixon had actually sent us a letter regarding that as well. And I agree with that. We've dealt with some of those things. We've seen the scenarios, we've seen the 3 to 1, 4 to 1, that sort of thing. There doesn't seem to be a drastic change dollar-wise in any of those. I think we've put together a lot of hard work to come up with the scenario that we come up with 2 to 1, and I'm comfortable that we've done our due diligence in regarding that. And then going forward, if we do some of these policy changes, or we look at some of this thing as a whole for next year, and do as my esteemed colleagues have said, the council as a whole, and bring everything together. And maybe we can change things in a little more of a proper way of dealing with properties the right way, and doing it diligently, and dealing with some of the budget. But I'm prepared to go forward with the work that we've put forward so far.
Okay, any other comments? Well, like I said earlier, I think that we spend a lot of time talking about ratios and percentages, where we haven't spent a lot of time really looking at the amounts, and I think that there is still some savings that we could be reducing the overall budget and helping the ratio by reducing rather than changing and increasing. And so that's the way I feel. So I still think that we could be doing more work on it. And I'll be voting against the motion. Any more comments on the motion? All those in favor? Against? Motion is carried. Next item on our list is public comments. Not sure if anyone had the letter. We've pretty well gone through all the stuff. We have a Farrell Road local area service that I wanted to talk about at council.
I'd like to comment on the business taxation as well, if there's opportunity.
Well, there's actually, I didn't want to open it up to the public.
Okay,
It's,
that's fine. I'll take it privately.
That would be perfect. Thank you. We can take a couple minute break. We're going to be talking about some other business here. If people want to hang around for that, they're more than welcome.